Once upon a time, in a small Jamaican village nestled between the hills and the sea, there was a vibrant forest where all kinds of animals lived. Among them was a clever parrot named Polly, who was known throughout the village for her sharp wit and bright, colorful feathers. Polly could mimic any sound and outsmart anyone who tried to trick her. She loved to fly around the village, greeting everyone with her cheerful voice, always ready with a joke or a riddle. But not far from the village, in a dark and shadowy cave at the edge of the forest, there lived a Duppy. This Duppy was known as Greedy Joe because of his insatiable appetite. Greedy Joe would eat anything he could get his hands on: fruits, vegetables, even the food offerings left out by the villagers for the spirits. But no matter how much he ate, he was never satisfied. One day, Greedy Joe overheard the villagers talking about Polly. They said she was the cleverest bird in all of Jamaica and could solve any problem. This made Greedy Joe furious. How could a mere bird be considered cleverer than him, a powerful Duppy? Determined to prove his superiority, Greedy Joe came up with a plan. He would trick Polly into giving him all the food in the village, and then everyone would see that he was the smartest of all. That evening, as the sun was setting and the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, Polly was perched on a tree branch near the village square, enjoying the cool breeze. Greedy Joe slithered out of his cave and made his way toward Polly, hiding his ghostly form in the shadows. "Good evening, Polly," Greedy Joe called out in a silky voice as he approached the tree. Polly tilted her head and looked down at the figure below. "Good evening, Joe. What brings you out of your cave tonight?" "Oh, Polly, I've come to you because I need your help," Greedy Joe said, trying to sound as sincere as possible. "I've heard of your cleverness, and I'm in a bit of a pickle. You see, I've been cursed by an old spirit, and the only way to break the curse is to eat the finest food in the village. But I'm too weak to gather it myself. Will you help me?" Polly, who was always willing to help others, thought for a moment. She didn't trust Greedy Joe, but she was curious about the so-called curse. "What kind of curse is this?" Polly asked, narrowing her eyes. "And why should I believe you?" Greedy Joe, who had already prepared his lie, sighed dramatically. "Oh, Polly, it's terrible. The spirit cursed me to be eternally hungry, and nothing I eat satisfies me. The only way to break the curse is to feast on the best food in the village. If you help me, I promise I'll leave the village in peace and never bother anyone again." Polly wasn't convinced, but she decided to play along to see what Greedy Joe was up to. "All right, Joe," Polly said. "I'll help you gather the food, but you must promise not to harm anyone in the village." "Oh, of course, Polly," Greedy Joe said, grinning to himself. "You have my word." The next morning, Polly flew around the village, gathering the best fruits, vegetables, and delicacies from the villagers. Everyone was eager to help Polly, not knowing that the food was for Greedy Joe. Polly piled the food high in the village square, and soon there was a mountain of delicious treats. Greedy Joe appeared at the edge of the square, licking his lips in anticipation. "Ah, Polly, you've done well. Now, let me eat and break this curse." But Polly wasn't finished yet. She had a plan of her own. "Not so fast, Joe," Polly said, fluttering down to perch on the top of the food pile. "There's one more thing you need to do before you can eat." Greedy Joe, who was growing impatient, frowned. "What do you mean, Polly?" "I've done everything you asked," Polly grinned mischievously. "Well, if you want to break the curse, you have to solve a riddle first. That's the rule of the spirit who cursed you." Greedy Joe, who thought he was clever, scoffed. "A riddle? Ha! That's easy. Ask your riddle and I'll solve it in no time." Polly nodded and began to recite the riddle. "I'm something you eat, though I'm not sweet. I'm hard and round, and found in the ground. If you crack my shell, you'll find me inside, but beware, for too much and you'll be fried." "What am I?" Greedy Joe scratched his head, thinking hard. He knew he had to answer correctly to get his hands on the food. He thought about everything he had eaten: fruits, nuts, roots, but nothing seemed to fit the riddle. "Come on, Joe," Polly teased. "Surely you're smart enough to solve this little riddle." Greedy Joe was getting frustrated. He hated riddles, and he hated not knowing the answer even more. But he wasn't about to let Polly know that. It must be an egg," Greedy Joe said confidently. Polly shook her head. "Wrong. Try again, Joe." Greedy Joe was furious. How could he not know the answer? He thought harder, trying to come up with something that matched the clues. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he shouted, "It's a peanut." Polly burst out laughing. "Wrong again, Joe. It looks like you're not as clever as you thought." Greedy Joe was so angry that he couldn't see straight. He lunged at the food pile, determined to eat it all. But Polly was quicker. She flew into the air and with a loud squawk, she called out to the villagers, "Everyone, come quick. Greedy Joe is here to steal your food." The villagers rushed out of their homes, armed with brooms, pots, and pans. They surrounded Greedy Joe, who was now trapped in the middle of the square. Greedy Joe tried to scare them away with his ghostly wails, but the villagers weren't afraid. "Leave our village, Joe," they shouted, shaking their brooms and pans at him. "You're not welcome here." Realizing he was outnumbered, Greedy Joe turned and fled back to his cave, his belly still empty and his pride shattered. Polly, perched on a rooftop, watched him go and smiled to herself. From that day on, Greedy Joe never dared to come near the village again, and Polly was celebrated as a hero. The villagers threw a grand feast in her honor, and Polly, ever the clever bird, enjoyed every bite. As for Greedy Joe, he remained in his dark cave, hungry and alone, forever haunted by the riddle he couldn't solve. And Polly? She continued to fly around the village, her feathers shining brightly, always ready with a new riddle or a clever trick, reminding everyone that sometimes wit and wisdom are mightier than even the greediest of foes.